Trump administration has moved to expand a controversial policy involving migrants. The change would significantly increase the collection of DNA from migrants or those seeking asylum who wind up in government custody. Jennifer Bellamy is with us and is looking into the proposal and what it could mean for those trying to enter the United States.
Well, Jeff, the Department of Justice released a draft of this policy earlier this week. It would likely mean a quick cheek swab DNA sample for adults who cross the border illegally and are even just briefly detained by Customs and Border Patrol or ICE. The plan isn't exactly new, but critics are still saying it goes too far.
A proposed change would allow the federal government to more widely connect DNA from migrants and those seeking asylum who are taken into custody. The information would then be moved to a massive FBI database used to hunt criminals. As of August, the database produced about 480,000 hits or matches with law enforcement seeking crime scene data and helps with 469,000 investigations. As for the proposal, there would be exceptions for those entering the country legally, and the change wouldn't apply to legal permanent residents or children under the age of 14. But it's not clear how the regulation would impact those seeking asylum through official crossings. The Trump administration says the plan would save lives and bring criminals to justice. The ultimate goal, to reduce crimes committed against U.S. citizens by collecting DNA from immigrants that can often slip through the cracks. They also believe the plan would deter migrants from illegally trying to enter the United States. The collection of DNA is already happening, but on a much more limited basis when a migrant is prosecuted in federal court for a criminal offense. That includes illegally entering the country, but it mostly applies to single adults, as those with children aren't typically prosecuted because children can't be detained. Civil rights groups like the American Civil Liberties Union have bashed the proposal, citing issues with privacy, surveillance, and storing the information on a database used for serious criminals. The group argues the government already uses less intrusive forms of identification, like fingerprinting. Many are concerned the data would be misused and that those whose only crime is crossing the border illegally would still be subject to the regulation. It said the change would impact hundreds of thousands of migrants.
And the rule has now been published and is open for public comment for the next 20 days. The federal government is already working on a pilot program that could be launched as soon as that comment period is closed.